Now I want to bring in someone who needs no introduction. I want to bring in Pete Buttigieg. Pete, great to see you as always. You served in Afghanistan. I want to get your perspective right now in this war in Iran. I know one of the things that when you were in Afghanistan, driving outside of the wire, in areas that were very, very dangerous, the IEDs that tragically killed so many of our service members, some of those parts were made in Iran. And I don't think that gets enough attention as well, because as we think about this phase that's already begun in Iran, where they've been launching the ballistic missiles at our interests in the Middle East and in the neighboring countries, and Donald Trump so cavalierly throws around, ground invasion, this, that, and the other. What we're seeing, what you've seen and what you're aware of, it just seems that there's no plan here, even on details like that. So I want to get your perspective on everything that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I take away from my experience, which to be clear was not in Iran, but was in Afghanistan, which was impacted by Iran, everything is connected and everything is extremely complicated. That almost goes without saying when you're talking about the Middle East or when you're talking about war and peace. But I think it's worth reminding ourselves of, because we have learned this the hard way repeatedly in our lifetime. We saw how hard it is to achieve regime change in Iraq. We saw what happens when you don't have a clear sense of mission in Afghanistan. And here we are, just a few days into this Iran war. There are already casualties. We have not yet heard a consistent explanation for what we're even doing there, which means we are a long way away from understanding what it would take for the mission to be accomplished. It's more like mission to be determined. And when you're putting American lives on the line, not to mention sending billions of dollars that we really need here at home into a war, you have to have a better plan than that.
Yeah, which is the question that needs to be always asked, is who's paying the price for war? Soldiers abroad, what that actually means. And we know that we've had service members who have been killed. And, Hegseth described that as, why is the media, why is the fake news always focusing on those things? Why aren't you focusing on the blowing up stuff in Tehran? Focus on that. Then at home, the military families here. Can you discuss that?
Yeah, I mean, when you get ready to deploy, you, of course, are constantly thinking about the worst case scenario. And the scenario that you pray hard is never going to happen is that your loved ones get the knock on the door. That has now happened to 6 families that we know of. And that, the people who served, they're patriots. They're ready to go wherever their chain of command tells them they are needed. In exchange for them making that promise, putting their lives on the line, they are supposed to be assured that their commander-in-chief would never put their lives on the line unless it was absolutely necessary, unless there was no alternative. Look, we have a military because sometimes a country needs to use force. But one thing we have learned over and over and over again is that you only use force if you absolutely have to. And that simply has not been what happened here in Iran. This was very much a war of choice, and the burden is being carried by those service members. And by the way, this is service members all over the region, many of whom did not think of themselves as being deployed into an active combat zone. Those who lost their lives were a reserve unit that was deployed to Kuwait. When I heard that missiles had been launched at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, I couldn't stop thinking about what it felt like when I was at that base getting ready to go into Afghanistan, and then later getting ready to come home after the deployment, because that is was a stopover base for so many of the troops who came and went. So really troops across that entire region, not to mention civilians, like the American civilians who have been told by the State Department to get out of the countries that they're in, but with what is clearly a very after the fact attempt to help them do it with no real plan having been put in place. They're the ones who are most at risk. And then all of us are paying in some way. We just learned this week through investigative journalism in the New York Times, we just learned that the VA has cut thousands of doctor and nurse jobs. And this is after assuring the public last year that the medical care was not going to be impacted. How is it that this country, this government, this administration is cutting doctors and nurses who take care of our service members when they are veterans, says we don't have the money to take care of them, but can find the money to take out of our communities, out of our taxpayer funds, and send it into this war with no clear mission all the way over in Iran.
And there's this split screen, of course, while this war is raging on, while there are these massive cuts to VA and healthcare being ripped away, you have this Mar-a-Lago class or Epstein class. Quite literally partying away at Mar-a-Lago. With the images of like people dancing in martini glasses and, just so disconnected and feel like they're rubbing it in the faces of all the other Americans. But quite literally, when this war began, rather than address the people, Donald Trump was holding like $1 million fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago. He couldn't even get to Washington, D.C. He stayed at his fundraiser instead of addressing the American people. And I just, look, there's definitely outrage among the people, but it's just so fascinating that's not even like talked about, of like such a betrayal. When I saw that, I was like, what's he doing? If you're going to send our troops to war, get your ass to DC, address the American people, talk about what are you doing?
NVIDIA is overrated. And I think it's time, as the market darling is drawing to an end. You see, one of the main...
Yeah, the symbolism could not be more extreme, right? The commander-in-chief, as a side hustle, literally owns a club for rich people that costs $1 million just to get into. And he's on the sidelines of the golf course at that club, launching American troops who, of course, aren't the kinds of people who can buy memberships to Mar-a-Lago or, invest in his crypto fund. They're the ones who are going to be paying the price. Think about this. You've got money from the Middle East going into the Trump family crypto fund, while you have Americans going to the Middle East for Donald Trump's war. It could not be more upside down, more wrong in terms of the priorities and the interest that this president has at heart. But it's because he knows that this isn't going to impact him or his buddies. The richer you are, the less you are likely to feel either the deployments themselves or the tax dollars that all of us are sending abroad at the moment when there are tax cuts going to the richest. This is another thing, right? America doesn't usually cut taxes, especially for the wealthy, in the middle of a war effort. George W. Bush changed that. We had a tax cut at the same time as the Iraq War. Most of us Americans, not just Democrats, believe that that was wrong on both counts, that the war was wrong, and that the enormous deficit, the debt we're going to be paying for the rest of our lives, created by that tax cut for the rich was wrong. All of these things are connected, and we've got to demand better. Now, here's the important thing. The American people already understand what's going on, right? Most Americans reject having a war of choice in Iran. Most Americans reject the Trump tax cuts for the wealthy. Most Americans reject the idea that it's okay to cut healthcare, cut Meals on Wheels for seniors, cut doctors and nurses at the VA while all of this is going on. The important thing now is to make sure that the American people have our voice heard, whether that's town halls, taken to the streets, but most importantly of all, of course, at the ballot box.
Yeah, when you mention all these things are interconnected also. The Doge cuts to the State Department, gutting it, and now probably would be nice to have diplomats and people in the Middle East who can start interfacing with American citizens who are terrified right there. There was apparently no plan to evacuate Americans in the Middle East. People would call a phone number and it would basically say, good luck. Try to find a commercial airport. While commercial airports are under attack, you have that. Then you have the attack on our allies. And when if you're going to go to a war, you need the help of your allies. And, Donald Trump's out there tariffing everybody, attacking Ukraine when Ukraine actually holds unique knowledge about how to deal with Shahed drones and ballistic missiles, then rushing to Zelensky and saying, hey, actually, you know what? Forget all the stuff I said. We need your help right now in shooting down these Shahed drones. But then Trump sends out Caroline Leavitt, who then blames Zelensky for other issues in the United States on the same day. It's just like, what are you, like, they don't know what's happening. Like, it's so bizarre. Then they have Steve Witkoff, a guy who did like real estate stuff with Trump, a Trumpy real estate guy, out there doing these negotiations with the foreign minister of Oman. I'm like, what are you doing?
And the thing about this is, again, it's not just that it's a bad look. It's that there are life and death consequences for troops and ultimately for our whole country to this being done the way it's being done. Think about this. Many of those Middle East embassies, even deep into the second year of the Trump administration, still aren't properly staffed. They don't even have confirmed ambassadors. And they've been removing or firing a lot of career foreign service ambassadors just because they happen to serve, because, again, they're not political appointees, so of course they did, under Democratic as well as Republican administrations. When you do that, that weakens this country, let alone the putting a thumb in the eye of our allies. I remember serving alongside troops from Denmark, to take one example. They gave more lives per capita than any other ally in the Afghanistan operation. Obviously, pissing them off through the Greenland rhetoric is not something that strengthens the alliance. And NATO matters. NATO is involved in missiles that had to be shot down on their way to Turkey from Iran. So we continue to see just the utter chaos. And I think that's the biggest thing to be concerned about here, that when you go in, we've learned this the hard way. When you go into the Middle East without a plan, the result tends to be chaos. And chaos eventually can lead to harm to Americans, even sometimes on American soil. The administration needs to give us answers. Congress needs to demand those answers, but they're doing the opposite. Senate Republicans had a vote, and now virtually every Republican senator is on the record endorsing this war of choice that most Americans are against. It's one more reason why we have to remember that the ultimate backstop here is the American people. In this country, the people are still in charge. The people need to tell Congress that we expect them to hold the administration to a higher standard when troops' lives and American treasure are on the line.
We talked before about who pays the price for war. I remember a story that you've shared before about the letter on your life before you went to war, and writing, if anything were to happen to you. And that was a significant, experience for you, having to write that and reflect on your life in general. Before we go, for people who haven't heard that story, if you could talk about that, especially in light of the fact that as we hear the American service members who have been killed, in this war, and you just see their photos and you see their people and you see, regardless of their age, but particularly when I see a young person too, it hits particularly hard. They all hit hard, but it's talk to us about that.
Yeah, you see the faces of the fallen, and they remind you maybe of somebody somebody you grew up with. They remind me of people that I served with, and this terrible news of their sacrifice certainly reminds me of what it was like to sit down and write that letter. I still have it around here in my desk drawer. It says "just in case" on the outside. They tell you to write a letter like that, just in case you don't come back. And there's some things that you want the people you love most to know. And it's a reminder for me. I keep it around as a reminder of what was on the line and a reminder of how thankful I am that I did come back okay. But also what it felt like not being sure, which is something that so many people, hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans over the years who have been deployed have gone through. And by the way, many answer the call to serve and are deployed many times. There was a period where I know some of the people I served with were on their 5th or 6th deployment. And we made a decision, an increasingly cross-partisan decision among the American people, that we weren't going to go into another generation's worth of forever wars like that. And that was something that this president promised his base, promised the American people. It was part of his appeal. It felt for a minute like you didn't just have to be a Democrat to want us out of the forever wars, but the Democrats and a whole lot of independents and a whole lot of Republicans had come to see this. And now the reverse is the case. And this isn't going to matter just because of lines on a map or words on a page. This is going to matter because, as the president has assured us, more families are going to get that knock on the door, are going to have to open that letter from someone they loved, whose life was put on the line by this president without a clear plan.
And Pete, before we go, any other message you want to send to our 7 million subscribers out there who are certainly glad to be hearing your voice right now during these difficult times.
I think the most important thing to remember now is it doesn't have to be this way. The administration does a good job of creating this sense of powerlessness, like there's this steamroller that's just rolling over all of us and there's nothing you can do about it. And yet we have seen how they can be stopped. We saw them stopped on the tariffs. We saw them stopped in their attempt to completely cover up the Epstein files. We saw them stopped in some of what they were trying to do on healthcare. And what that tells me is you don't even have to wait till election day for people rising up in this country to matter. When members of Congress started to be afraid to see their own constituents at town halls and then started changing their votes, and I'm talking about some Republicans here, when some places like my home state of Indiana, which is of course a very Republican state, stood up and rejected the president's gerrymandering plan to grab power. All of these things are pieces of evidence that we can turn what is happening in this country. Of course, the best moment we'll have for that this year will come with those November elections. But we don't have to sit around waiting. It is a big deal that millions of Americans will be marching toward the end of this month in the next No Kings set of marches around the country. It matters to speak up and get the attention of your elected representative, especially if they're one of these Republicans running cover for this president while they know deep down that that is wrong. They are beginning to realize that this president will not be in charge forever. We, in the opposition, need to realize the same thing and start planning accordingly.
Pete Buttigieg, thanks as always for joining us, and thanks for your voice right now. We need it more than ever.
Appreciate you. Thanks for having me on.